Who is winning the GNU so far? In the last couple of months since the GNU was fully formed and a lot of different ministers have got to work, a lot of different political parties have settled in as members of the GNU or the opposition, a lot of South Africans are now starting to wonder, and a lot of political parties are starting to shout very loudly and, in the ANC's case, have an internal identity crisis about how well the GNU is working out for themselves, competing with each other within government to outperform each other to impress South Africans the most. This was always going to happen. Parties thinking, how are we doing in the government of national unity and how is it working out for us? So today, let's look at not just the government of national unity, but the whole political landscape, because the GNU also meant certain parties were in opposition, and see how everybody is doing and who is truly winning the GNU. This is The Issue with Dan Corder. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. And today, this is the issue with who is winning the government of national unity. You already know about our TV show Mondays and Tuesday nights on ENCA, and you should also know that we now have a daily morning news podcast of about 20 minutes. It's called Dan Corder in the Morning. We've just passed 10,000 streams in less than our first 3 weeks, which is phenomenal. Thank you for the support. They're on all the podcast streamers. Just search Dan Corder in the Morning. Right, let's get into the GNU. Yesterday, a News 24 article, or specifically not the article, but the headline and the tweet in the headline went viral across South Africa. It essentially said that the ANC is very upset about how the DA is humiliating them in the GNU. The headline got misconstrued and retweeted a bajillion times and carried in different places. People were accusing News 24 of doing propaganda and lying and being batting for the DA. And I'm not here to weigh in on that, but I just want to talk about this headline and the actual article, because I think the vast majority of people who retweeted and had comments and hot takes about it just didn't read the article. The article said that in the coming week, the ANC is going to have a big get-together. I think it's their National Working Committee, to talk about how the GNU has gone so far. And very high up on the agenda is going to be the fact that the DA ministers have made them look incompetent and slow, and made their own ANC ministers look impotent and uncaring and unmotivated, right? And what the article was saying, the quote from the insider who spoke with News 24 on condition of anonymity, wasn't saying that the DA ministers and the non-ANC ministers who are now in the GNU have been outperforming the ANC ministers, because frankly, it's only been a couple of months. It's too soon to say. You can't just walk in as a minister and immediately the next day start doing radical things. What the insider was actually saying was that the DA and others have won the PR battle, the public relations battle, since the formation of the GNU, because they have come out and been able to garner a lot of media attention and a lot of talkability, and made headlines and got in South Africans' news cycles in a way that the ANC hasn't. Because remember, politics is performance art. Politics is just, the same way you see a mime on the street or you see a magician on a stage. Politics is about the public performance of showing people that you're doing a good job and you're fighting for them. Of course, it's very important that you actually do a good job so that you can justify your claims that you make in public. A lot of it is how you spin and create a narrative and handle the public relations of being a politician. And so this insider was saying that ANC is not doing a good job at that. And the DA, amongst others, their ministers have started in a really strong PR way. Now, I do want to say something very obvious, which is that in a lot of ways, the ANC ministers can't do that, because maybe they were already the minister of that department. They're not going to suddenly come out and drag their own track record. And similarly, if they've taken over a ministry that was previously held by an ANC minister, they're not going to come out and drag the work and expose the wrongdoings and misdeeds and incompetence and failings of the previous minister, because then they'd be dragging their own party comrade. They'd be dragging their own political party. It's not in their political incentive. Whereas it's extremely easy, if you're a not ANC minister now, to come in, because you can drag them because they're an opposition party to you, and you have been dragging them probably for your whole political career. So this is not me saying, wow, the DA ministers and the non-ANC ministers have done such a phenomenal job in the last few months. I kind of just think they've done their jobs. It's the job of making it look like you're doing stuff and making it look like you're fixing the problems of the previous minister. So that's how the ANC is feeling, and it does not look like so far the GNU is working out for the ANC. Although I will remind you that the GNU is a bit of a miracle for keeping the ANC in so much power at all, considering how badly the ANC did. So let's talk about the DA. They've had a bunch of big wins. Dean McPherson, Leon Schreiber has been saying things that's getting a lot of talkability around home affairs. And all of these, DA ministers are trying to do stuff. Dion George just yesterday tried to say that he thought that we should keep the options for the car power ship deal, that really, really controversial, basically Turkish company that provides like full electricity creation stations on ships. There's been huge drama about that if you didn't know. And it looks like that deal is dead in the water now, particularly because, I'm not jinxing it, touch wood, but Eskom is doing really well. So the DA ministers have been getting good press and have been looking good in the eyes of South Africans because they have a lot of ministers, and all of the ministers are able currently to frame themselves as doing work to undo the past wrongdoings of ANC workers in those ministries. So the GNU is currently working out really nicely for the Democratic Alliance. So remember, it's so far, because in the coming months and years, they're going to actually have to institute policy to cause radical reform and change. Like, they're going to have to actually reform these ministries in the way that they do work. But it has started well for the Democratic Alliance because they've been able to do this PR exercise that's worked out in their favor. Now let's talk about Gayton McKenzie, because he is the greatest performance artist currently in the GNU in South African politics. He tweets everything. And it's been interesting to watch. We've never had someone so hardcore tweet their every waking breath as Gayton McKenzie is doing right now. And he's copped flack for it from some quarters and real love and praise from others, because he's got the itchiest fingers in South African politics. He wants to weigh in on absolutely everything. And the way that Gayton tweets is actually quite smart, because he inserts himself into issues even if he's not going to do anything about them. Great example, earlier this week, he, after a full week of the Miss South Africa controversy surrounding the South African women of Nigerian and Mozambican ancestry who's made the top 14 and all the xenophobia around that, after a full week of that roiling, Gayton McKenzie tweeted, "I'm going to get back and I'm going to investigate and I'm going to check, because we can't have a Nigerian representing Miss South Africa." Now, that very clearly, in my view, in the view of many, aids and abets rampant xenophobia and disinformation and peddles hatred and cruelty against this young, born and raised South African woman from Soweto. But think about the way he tweeted that. He just said, "I'm going to get involved and I'm going to check because we can't have a Nigerian representing South Africa in Miss South Africa." So he didn't promise he was going to change anything. He didn't promise he was going to do anything. He just said, "I'm going to go and be involved." And, Gayton's base is very, very often deeply xenophobic and immigrant hating. And so it played really, really well with his supporters, as much as it got condemnation from a lot of other people, including the EFF.
So if she was born here, she's South African. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter who they are. She's not her parents. She's herself.
Gayton McKenzie, though, a lot of his tweeting, it's hard to really see whether it's working out on net well for him or not, because the way that he's treated people in the arts, for example, has upset a lot of people. Some famous artists have come out and literally said Gayton needs to stop using a Skopendona approach towards artists. And they've also been saying that he's been overly obsessed with sport as part of the sports, arts and culture, because he came in really hard for sport. But no matter how you feel about Gayton McKenzie's different positions, the truth is that he is getting headline after headline, and in the South African consciousness, he is working and he is doing the work. And I don't believe that all press is good press, all PR is good PR, but in this case, because he's not done anything that has outraged the whole country and caused condemnation, he's getting the press, he's getting the attention. He, as a performance artist politician, has had a good GNU so far. For, remember, a tiny party. The PA is so small. But like, the outsized presence of Gayton McKenzie on South Africa's consciousness, way larger than the PA, is working out in his favor. Now let's talk about two parties who aren't in the government of national unity because they basically both chose not to be. It's the Economic Freedom Fighters and the MK party, who got very, very significant shares of the vote. Like, between them, they got close to 25% of everybody who voted. It's a lot of people. But they both chose not to be in the GNU. and they both tried, or at least the EFF really tried to create a progressive caucus in parliament, which is really fascinating that they call it the progressive caucus when so many of these parties fundamentally disagree on many things. Very few of them are fundamentally progressive or leftist at all. And if it really came down to policy, none of them would be able to agree. But so many of these progressive caucus initial signups ended up in the GNU anyway. And the EFF, I think, has had a really bad time in the last few months because they've been absolutely excluded from power, which means that they can't do all of the work that, or the performance art of the work that all the people I just spoke about in the ANC, PA, and others have been able to do. They've been completely excluded because they've got no work to do. They're just in the opposition. It literally disempowers them and removes them from the media narrative, removes them from people's consciousness, removes their abilities to do any real work. And in fact, the only thing that they've been hitting the headlines for is the latest revelations of the VBS scandal from a key witness who was involved in and was probably the chief architect of the VBS looting, of that terrible crisis with that bank that caused the destruction of all the savings of so many impoverished people in Limpopo. That testimony, that key witness that the NPA now has, lines up perfectly with all the investigative journalism claiming to show that Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu were active participants and creators of looting opportunities for their own advantage to the tune of millions of rands from VBS. Not for the EFF, for them. But by design, the EFF is like a one-person party, or maybe like 1 1/3, because it really is just Julius Malema's party, and he's worked to disempower and weaken the public profile and seeming importance and relevance of anyone else in the EFF. Think about what a big deal Mbuyiseni and Ndlozi was a few years ago. He's still a big deal, not nearly as big a deal. And Shivambu's been kept really carefully in his box. But that party is basically Malema and Shivambu. And now those two figureheads, the only two in the economic freedom fighters, look like they're seriously in trouble and might face very damaging trials that could end up in prison. And because they've made the party to be such a 1 1/3 man band, and because the EFF is not in power anywhere or in the GNU, there's nothing else to talk about. There's no other way that the EFF can redeem the narrative, can change the narrative around them. They are in the news and they're talked about by South Africans only when people are talking about Malema and Shivambu and the looting of VBS Bank. So not sure it's gone very well for the EFF at all, this so far of the Government of National Unity. And then there's the MK party who, I don't know, like they were excluded from power very purposefully and specifically in national government by the GNU and also in KwaZulu-Natal, which means they've got a similar problem to the economic freedom fighters in that they aren't able to do much that can get South Africa talking in terms of ruling. And aside from that, because the election is over, they're kind of fading quite quickly. I'm not saying their support is fading, but they were in the news because of the controversial, successful attempt to get John Tlhophe as their leader and member of parliament in South Africa, now get him on the Judicial Service Commission. And so the news is about this John Tlhophe scandal, and a lot of the news points out that he is a disgraced former judge who was impeached and removed from the South African legal community. So the news is about John Tlhophe not being a good dude and in many people's view, woefully inappropriate to be on the JSC and not a great member of parliament either. So that's not good public narrative news for MK. But that's kind of all that they are talking about. They then tried to withdraw their claims of election rigging, the case that they put against the IEC in the Electoral Court. And the Electoral Court said, no, we're going to deal with this anyway. Because if the case that you've made is full of nonsense with no evidence, then you, MK, have caused huge reputational damage to the IEC and caused people to question and have doubt in our democratic systems unjustifiably. And so that's not working out well for them either. And then there's the fact that because they're not in power, the reason why the MK exists and the reason why people talk about them and voted for them is Jacob Zuma. But Jacob Zuma's not in power. So he's not got much to do. He's not got a lot of things to put forward to South Africa to get people talking about him again, because there's no election coming that he might do really well in anymore. He kicked up a ruckus earlier this week about being expelled from the African National Congress, but it felt like the latest leg of a circus because, of course, he was expelled from the ANC. stabbed them in the back, accused them of being apartheid collaborators and sell out to white minority capital. And he created a party that shamboked their support and dropped them to 40%. So of course he was going to be expelled. No one was like, oh wow, what a disaster, terrible on the ANC. And I think the EFF and MK have an extremely serious problem that they need to figure out in the coming months and years to be relevant, to like have things to do, to show off about that makes them look good. Like they really have that problem because everyone else who's in the GNU has work to do that they can show off and contribute and, celebrate. Whereas MK and the EFF are so fundamentally cut out of power, and all of the talkability about them is bad stuff, that we really don't know how they are going to be impressive and show off in the coming years. Because by then, Malema and Shivambu could be in serious legal jeopardy, and Jacob Zuma will be like in his late 80s. Like they both have a crisis of how to flesh out their parties now, make them relevant and powerful so that they can exist and flourish and thrive beyond their figureheads. So, who's winning the GNU? I'm going to say not the ANC or the EFF or MK. I think the DA is doing fine, relatively, but they're just doing their jobs. And controversially, as much as I don't like nearly everything he says, I think right now Gayton McKenzie has made the most of the GNU so far. But we'll have another update on that soon. This is The Issue with Dan Corder. Let me know what you think in the comments. See you in a week.